So that's the formal title of my talk today. The informal title is OMG, there's way too much waste in the ICU. What can we do about it? As a bit of an introduction, I'm Iman. I'm currently a researcher at the BC Center for Disease Control next door. A lot of this work has been done with my research partner, Alec. He's a third-year medical student and unfortunately couldn't be here today. He's at a busy inpatient at Surrey Memorial. So I'm flying solo, as Jade said earlier. So I think it's always helpful to start with some definitions. And when it comes to medical waste, one of the big problems is we often don't have clear definitions. And so the definitions we apply to our work are split into two. One is biohazardous medical waste. This is stuff that's come into contact with tissues, blood, anything close to the patient. And then there's the solid medical waste, which is everything else typically in the room. We focused on solid medical waste because it's a huge overlooked problem, we believe. About 80% of it is produced before the patient even enters the room, and this is often due to overstocking or excessive packaging. And of the waste that is produced, nearly half of it is incorrectly sorted. So instead of being put into plastic or paper waste streams, a lot of it often goes into landfill, or in worst cases, goes for incineration. So it's lumped up with biohazardous waste, which is also 10 times more to dispose of. Anytime this problem pops up in the news, I jump for joy, and these are a few kind of big news outlets where this issue of solid medical waste and plastic use in hospitals has come up. And for anyone that's more interested, I especially recommend the piece in the National Geographic. I think they did a great job covering both sides of the problem. And there isn't much research out there to begin with, but a lot of it has focused in surgical rooms or in whole hospital settings. And so we sort of identified the intensive care unit as another area that could use a lot more research. And so we partnered up with the ICU at Royal Columbian Hospital to carry out some of this research. And as far as the ICU goes, there's typically no system in terms of, there's no personalized system, I should say, for stocking a room based on what a patient needs. And so as a result of that, there is often regular overstocking. And in some hospital ICU sites, everything that's in the room with the patient has to be bagged up and discarded, whether that's ever seen the light of day, whether that's still in sterile packaging or not. And so, yeah, there's a lot of equipment that gets thrown out. We really wanted to understand this problem in the context of the Royal Columbian Hospital ICU, and so with the staff there, we set out to do a waste quantification audit. Over a period of 5 weeks, we collected kind of the solid medical waste, everything that was unused but in the room, from 25 patients that we kind of described as regular patient scenarios. So these weren't people in isolation rooms, these weren't people only there for a day or people there for a lot longer than an average stay. And we did this over several weeks to kind of adjust for any other, variables. This is what it looked like. We sort of spread this thing out onto the table. We got to quantifying it, a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and we finally tabulated the data. And so this is just a brief snapshot of some of the results I thought was interesting. Beginning with the top 3 items by price that were often discarded. One of them, or the first 2 you'll see, are really small plastic items that are really vital for the procedures, but we noticed that they were being discarded in large quantities, meaning these rooms were often stocked way more than needed. And I think, sometimes we have this perception that smaller items might cost less, but in the case of some of these items, they were individually wrapped and actually quite pricey per item. And so these were sort of the top 3 items, as well as the gloves. when we look at the top 3 items by weight, they're totally different. There are a lot of the cheaper items, sort of the wrapping, sterile wrapping that comes in the room. And so even this discrepancy between what weighs a lot and is probably costing a lot to dispose of, or if it's incinerated, very harmful for the environment, is a bit different than what's most expensive and often getting thrown out. And so these are just some of the numbers that we calculated, and I should mention this is a low understatement because we didn't include a lot of unique items that we found in these disposals. Instead, we focused on kind of the regular items that each room had. And so when we extrapolate this amount per year, that's about $140,000 of unused, never opened medical equipment that's just being discarded. And so we presented some of this finding to RCH and a member of Fraser Health. And hopefully we thought with some of this data we could drive some changes at that hospital and that unit. But it really led to a further question, which is what's being done across the country. And so we set out to do this environmental scan survey of critical care units and intensive care units across Canada. And so our survey instrument had 11 questions. It was completely anonymous. The first half was about demographic data, location, how many beds you have, whether it's a single patient or multi-patient room type. And then our follow-up, second question was all about sustainability initiatives. And so we had responses from 81 ICU or critical care units across the country. And these are some of the findings. So 20 individual units mentioned some type of recycling happening within their unit. But 19, so about 1/3 of the people who responded to the sustainability question, kind of admitted that there wasn't really any big initiatives taking place. We had some further learnings here, just going to showcase some of them. And a lot more. So we were really excited to learn about what's been going on kind of across Canada when it comes to waste management or solid waste management in the intensive care unit. And so with some of these ideas, we kind of went back to the ICU and met with the staff and team there and said, what kind of changes can we implicate? And so this is kind of the happier or more positive part of the presentation, which is potential solutions. And so some findings we saw from across Canada was a lot of ICUs would stock their rooms to kind of a minimal amount and then have these grab-and-go carts. So in cases where a patient needed more equipment, a staff could just grab one of these carts and just run into the room to make sure they had some of these less stocked items. Some rooms just chose to put their nursing server cart outside of the room and kind of get away from that requirement of having to throw out everything in the room once a patient leaves. Some hospitals have implemented a Kanban ordering system, which is kind of optimizing your ordering system to minimize a variety of costs and carbon footprint. But this also is a good solution in terms of reducing expired medical equipment, so equipment that you have to discard that's expired. And another approach, this is more behavioral economic approach, was just adding a little price tag to shelves just to communicate how expensive certain items are. Because I think a lot of times it's often not known, and so kind of handfuls of items might be taken into a room when we don't really need to. And this is one thing we did at the Royal Columbian Hospital ICU, is just panning out some of the waste we collected. So this is from 5 patients only, and we just spread this in a conference room table and kind of left it for a little while just for staff to come in. It just sparked the conversation, really. And for reference, there's a box of Kleenex in the top right corner of that box to kind of, paint a picture of how much waste is really generated. And so improvements for today, we were able to use some of our data to reduce stocking quotas at Royal Columbian. And so the bigger bag you see in that picture is waste from one patient before kind of our project. And the second bag is, the after picture. It's the waste after we had adjusted stocking quotas, but kind of didn't really implement any of the other change. So it just goes to show that even adjusting stocking quotas can have a big impact. And so there's a lot of stakeholders in every problem connecting to the environment, and these are kind of the four main ones we identify when it comes to solid medical waste. There's lots of ways for hospitals to kind of get involved in this. One is to kind of research the waste impact. Culture change and healthcare champions, as we just heard, play a huge part. Industry and resource uptake, so just communicating with maybe medical equipment suppliers that this is being packaged up too much, or there's too many items within this one set that all have to go out the window, half of which I might not even use could be another approach. And finally, the spread and uptake of ideas, which forums like today I think are fantastic for. There is also improvements from various stakeholders. So in terms of the NGO sector, there's often a lack of funding for NGOs to continue this work, and so coming up with social enterprise opportunities might be one way. In terms of government, better policy to inform how we can actually deal with medical waste as informed by various stakeholders. And private companies. So what can companies do in terms of reducing their footprint in terms of creating this product? So this is an art piece by a friend of me and Alex, Nancy, who's a third-year medical student too. And I just love how it captures kind of the problem we're up against. Because I think in the ICU, just like everywhere else in the hospital, the first concern is always patient well-being and maintaining low infection rates and best quality of care. And so I think this this picture really showcases how I often feel about this problem, which is a big big challenge, but that we need to kind of keep working towards it for a better future. Some acknowledgements here. So obviously the ICU team, Kathy, who's the manager of the ICU at Royal Columbian, the Canadian Critical Care Network and the respondents, BC Cape, who's been really fundamental in encouraging us to do this work, Sean, Kim, and Nancy. And one important person that I think I left out is the J.W. McConnell Foundation that gave me and Alec, another 20-year-old, money to actually do this work. So yeah, without further comments, this is our contact information if anyone has questions, and thank you so much for the opportunity.